Hi, we're going to continue to read A Journey to the Center of the Earth. Before we begin, please click like and subscribe. Chapter 3, Into the Bowels of the Earth. We waited 2 days for the overcast sky to open up and permit the sun to come out and cast the shadow of Scartaris on one of the 3 shafts. If it did not shine during these few days, we would have to put off our journey for an entire year. Finally, it happened. The sky cleared, and exactly at noon, the sun's rays sent the shadow of Scartaris on the central shaft. "Here it is," gasped my uncle joyously. "We found it. Forward, my friends, forward to the center of the earth." I looked at Hans to see his reaction to my uncle's words, but he only picked up his rope and calmly replied, "Forward." Our real journey had now begun. We advanced to the mouth of the central shaft. It measured about 100 feet in diameter. I stood on a rock at its edge and looked down. The sides of the shaft went almost straight down like the inside of a well and ended in nothingness. My hair stood on end, my teeth chattered, and my arms and legs grew weak. I felt like a drunken man. We divided the food, equipment, and instruments into 3 bundles, and each of us took a share on our backs. The clothes and ropes were tied into one bundle and tossed over the edge. We began our descent with the aid of a rope wound around a large block of lava at the top. As we slid into the darkness, I realized there were many natural footholds sticking out from the wall, which would help us in our downward climb. While I was concerned for our safety on the way down, my uncle was busy explaining to me the different layers of earth. Soon we had reached a rock ledge. Hans pulled on one end of the rope. It unwound from the rock above and fell to his feet. We sat down to rest for a while on the ledge, then continued. We climbed downward for 3 more hours. The bottom was not yet in sight, but a glance upward confirmed that the mouth of the crater was getting smaller and smaller as we got farther and farther away. We'd been climbing about 10.5 hours and had gone about 5,600 feet or a mile into the earth when a voice broke the silence. "Halt!" cried Hans from the lead position. "We've reached the end of our journey," my uncle said. "What? The interior of the earth already?" I asked. "No, you stupid fellow," he snapped, "but we've reached the bottom of the well." "And we can go no further?" I asked hopefully, looking forward to the upward climb. "I can see a tunnel to the right," my uncle answered, dashing my hopes of leaving. "We'll look at that tomorrow. Right now, let us eat and get whatever sleep we can." Stretching out on beds of ropes and clothes, we did as he said. At 8 o'clock the next morning, a faint kind of dawn woke us. Light, coming from the mouth of the crater, sparkled from the prisms of lava on the crater wall, enabling us to see around us. "Well, Harry," my uncle said, "did you ever pass a more comfortable night?" "It is quiet here," I replied, "but there is something terrible in this calm. I'm still not sure we're doing the right thing." "How can you be afraid when we really haven't gone 1 inch into the bowels of the earth as yet?" "What do you mean?" I asked, astonished. "Look at the barometer," he said. "You will see that we have just about reached sea level. Remember, we climbed up to enter the crater, and now we have gone just about as far down as we first climbed." I checked the barometer, and he was indeed correct. We had just reached sea level. My uncle took a small notebook from his pocket and began to write the first of the many notes he would keep. Monday, July 1st, 8:17 a.m. Barometer 29E, temperature 43, Fahrenheit. Directions, east-southeast. The last observation referred to the direction the tunnel we were to follow further into the earth. Now, Harry, we are about to take our first steps into the bowels of the earth, my uncle said. Bowels never before visited by man since the creation of the world. With that, my uncle and Hans connected their batteries to the Ruhmkopf coils hanging around their necks, and their lanterns immediately bathed the dark, gloomy tunnel in light. "Forward!" cried my uncle, and we entered the tunnel. Hans first, then my uncle. I was third. As I entered, I glanced up for a glimpse of the light that was the Iceland sky. Little did I know then that I was never to see that sky again. The great difficulty of our journey now really began. The way down was steeply inclined like a huge ramp. We were lucky that there were cracks and breaks in the rock and rocky soil that allowed us some footholds. Even though our equipment was heavy and the slope was steep, we moved rather easily, though slowly. Many magnificent shades of lava, from reds to browns to yellows, lined the tunnel. Crystals of quartz sparkled from the walls in our lights. To my surprise, we found no great increase in heat as we moved, or rather slid slowly downward. 2 hours after we entered the tunnel, the thermometer showed only 54 Fahrenheit, an increase of only 9 degrees. About 8 o'clock that evening, my uncle called a halt. The lamps were hung on the rock walls to provide light. We were in a large cavern. It was indeed beautiful, and I marveled at the beauty of the surroundings and the fact that there was plenty of air to breathe even at that depth. We ate our dinner eagerly, but a feeling of uneasiness struck us all. We are halfway through our water supply, and we have not yet seen any springs or water, I said to my uncle, and we have barely enough water to last us 5 days. Be easy about that subject, Harry, and don't worry, my uncle said with a laugh. We will find plenty of water. In fact, more than we can use. But when? When we get through the crust of lava, you can expect the water to force itself through these solid rock walls. But if we keep moving horizontally, straight ahead rather than vertically straight down, we may never get through the crust, I said. What makes you think we're not going vertically? My uncle asked, showing some surprise at my question. If we had been going straight down, far below sea level, the temperature would be up considerably, I said, but it is not. It's only up 15 degrees, so I must conclude that we are not going far vertically. In fact, I would judge that we've gone no deeper than 1,125 feet. The professor laughed. "Harry, my boy," he said, "would it surprise you to learn that according to my calculations, we were at this moment at least 10,000 feet below sea level?" I was shocked. How can that be? The temperature should then be 81 degrees. The professor showed me his calculations and drawings. He was correct. So all the accepted scientific theories about the earth getting hotter as a person went deeper were indeed wrong, as wrong can be. Chapter 4, Deeper and Deeper. The next day was Tuesday, the 2nd of July, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, we resumed our downward journey. We followed the natural pathway made thousands of years ago by molten lava rising out of the earth. This pathway made for an easy descent because of its slope. After 6 hours of following the path, Hans stopped in his tracks. My uncle and I were soon at his side. "We've come to the end of this pathway," my uncle said, and indeed, he was right. We were at the center of 4 small, narrow tunnels which crossed each other in the shaft in which we stood. "Which way do we go now?" I asked, hoping the answer would be back up. But this was not to be. Without a moment's hesitation, my uncle pointed quietly to the eastern tunnel, and without delay, we entered its dark opening. The descent in the tunnel was very gradual and twisting. Sometimes we walked through a series of arches, such as might be found in a church, arches which seemed to soar high into the cave, lost to sight. Other times, we had to crawl through a series of low, narrow tunnels that might have been made by some animal digging its way through the earth. We walked, we slid, we climbed over piles of rocks, and we rolled down heaps of lava. At 6 o'clock in the evening, after a tough day of climbing, we had gone through 6 miles southward, but less than a mile down. We ate in silence, rolled ourselves in our sleeping bags, and fell quickly asleep soon afterwards. After a night's sleep, we awoke fresh and ready for whatever adventures might await us on the new day. The tunnel through which we were traveling soon became absolutely horizontal, and at times even seemed to be sloping upward. Finding this upward climb tiring, I stopped, and my uncle, seeing this, came to me. "What is the matter?" he asked. "Are you tired after only 3 hours?" "Haven't you noticed that we're not going down but up?" I asked him. He looked shocked. "Up? How can that be?" he asked, looking at the sloping tunnel. "There's no doubt about it," I said. "For the last half hour the slope has been upward. If we continue this way, we might find ourselves back in Iceland." My uncle shook his head, not yet ready to admit that he had been mistaken by choosing the eastern tunnel. He would not answer me, but started once again moving along the upward tunnel. Hans first, then my uncle, then me. I did not want to lose sight of them. My worst fear was finding myself alone in this underground world. And besides, I reasoned, each step took us closer to the surface. That, in itself, was a good thing. At about 12 o'clock, I began to notice changes in the composition of the walls. They were no longer made solely of lava, but of living rock. I walked to one of the walls for a closer look. "What's the matter now?" my uncle called, seeing me at the wall. "Don't you see the different layers of calcium rock and the first indication of slate strata?" I asked. "Well," he said, as if waiting for a lecture. "We have arrived at that period in the history of the world when the first plants and first animals made their appearance on the earth," I announced. The professor never spoke a word. He took a look at the wall, then continued on ahead, leaving me disheartened. "If we have left the lava walls behind, then we are not on our way back up to Mount Sneffels," I muttered to myself. "And if I'm right, I should find some remains of these primitive animals and plants." I began to search for these clues of the past. My feet, so long accustomed to the hard lava soil, found themselves walking on a kind of soft dust, the remains of plants and shells. I stooped and picked up an almost perfect shell and ran to catch up to my uncle. "Do you see this?" I asked him. "So," he said, "you found a shell of an extinct crustacean animal, much like our present lobster, nothing more." "Well," I began. "I know," he said. "We have left the lava tunnel, and it's possible that my choice of tunnels was wrong. But we shall have to go to the end of this one to see for sure." And on we went. We had not yet found any water, and we forced ourselves to go on rations. Our supply would surely not last more than 3 days. I had read the horrors of thirst, and I knew that being where we were, it would mean the swift end of our journey and our lives. During the whole next day, we made our way through this never-ending tunnel. We no longer spoke to each other. We just walked quietly along. Sometimes the road still moved slightly upwards, but more usually it had a downward slant. We saw many other remains of old plants and animals as we climbed. The strata never changed, and I'd begun to hope that either one of two things would happen. One, that we'd reach a deep well and be able to go straight downward, or two, we'd hit a blank rock wall and have to go back the way we came. But when evening came, neither of those two possibilities had been realized. On Friday, after a night in which I felt a real thirst for the first time, we again began our journey. After about 10 hours of slow movement through a series of tunnels, the reflection of our lights off the tunnel walls grew dimmer and dimmer. At first, I thought our lamps were going out, but then I placed my hand against the wall. My fingers came away pitch black. "A coal mine!" I loudly exclaimed. "A coal mine without miners," my uncle answered back quickly. We stopped at that point for supper, but I was so thirsty that I could hardly eat. I sat and waited for the few drops of water that were my evening's ration. The others fell asleep, but I could not. I lay on my sleeping rug, counting the hours until morning. At 6 o'clock, we resumed our journey through the coal mine, and 20 minutes later, we came upon a huge tunnel. It was about 100 feet wide by 150 feet high, a natural cavern cast apart by some underground disturbance thousands of years before. As I gazed up at the wondrous cavern made up of vast layers of coal, an uneasiness fell over me. What was bothering me? Then suddenly I knew. My nose had detected an odor of gas. The cavern was filled with a dangerous gas which coal miners call fire damp. One spark could set off an explosion that would kill all of us instantly. Luckily, we lit our way with battery lanterns and not flaming torches, or we would all now be dead. We left the cavern and continued on our way along the dark tunnel. It was so dark that we could not see more than a few feet ahead. My uncle was impatient for the road to cease its horizontal direction and start heading downward. I felt that the tunnel would go on this way for months. Suddenly, at 6 o'clock, we came face to face with a blank wall. To the left, to the right, above and below, there was no place to go. We were at a dead end. We stood and stared at the wall, wondering what to do next. Finally, my uncle spoke. "Well, so much the better," he said. "At least we know we're not on the road taken by Arne Saknussemm. All we have to do is go back. Let us rest tonight, and within 3 days we shall be back at the point where the 4 tunnels began." "If our strength lasts that long," I said with some bitterness. "Tomorrow there will not be a drop of water left. It's almost gone." "And your courage with it?" my uncle asked in a severe tone. What could I say? I turned around and fell asleep, dreaming of water. I would have gladly traded a diamond mine for one glass of cool spring water. We'll read chapter 5 in the next video. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now. Love you guys. Thanks for listening in. Bye-bye.